Hey PTBO Canada, this is Angela O'Grady, and today in the studio we have Paul Lawton from the People's Party of Canada, our federal candidate for Peterborough Kawartha riding. And thank you so much for coming today, Paul.
My pleasure, thank you for having me.
Awesome. So when we started this interview series, we reached out to the community and we kind of asked them what they wanted to hear from their candidates and questions that they wanted answered. So we'll go ahead with that. Paul, as candidate for the PPC party, what is your main concern that you would like to tackle here locally in Peterborough?
Right, thanks for that. And I think when we're thinking about a federal campaign, the question makes perfect sense because the candidates are running for a local riding, but at a federal level. And so most of the issues or concerns that would be particular to Peterborough are best solved at a municipal or even provincial level, right? So the things that are within the purview of the federal government that matter to Peterborough are going to matter for other ridings as well, right? So that being said, my primary concern as it relates to Peterborough is the economy, right? So it's obviously no surprise to anyone that we've had a very difficult 18 to 22 months, right? And that's not just economically, of course, in many other ways. So my main concern for Peterborough would be to really jumpstart, to really help to recover the local economy. And from our perspective, the best way to do that, excuse me, is not for the federal government to change which sectors they want to tax and which ones they want to subsidize, or which groups they want to focus on, taking money from here and putting it over there, and then changing the balance, changing the formula a little bit, but for the government to remove the restrictions that are in place to allow employers to increase productivity, hire more employees, raise wages, and allow entrepreneurs, such as yourselves, I assume, to be able to create a business and provide jobs. So our part of our mandate would be to completely end corporate subsidies and corporate bailouts. That sounds good on paper, but if you listen to the other parties, whether it's on the left or the right, each of the parties they want to end subsidies and bailouts for the industries that they don't like, and the same on the other side, right? So either the parties want to be able to provide bailouts for banks and airlines and big manufacturing, and they want to make sure that's sustained artificially, or on the other side, they want to subsidize and artificially grow green technology and that sort of thing. And our perspective is the government should get out of the way and allow the economic potential of any particular area, especially Peterborough, to be able to blossom. So to make the market more inviting, for employers. So we would do that by also lowering the corporate tax rate. So our two big things in terms of the economy, ending subsidies and bailouts, and not just for the industries that we don't like, or you like and I don't like, but entirely, and lowering the corporate tax rate to make it attractive for employers.
Awesome, thank you. That kind of goes with my next question. I'm sure you're aware Peterborough is full of small business owners.
Yes.
So why should a small business owner vote for you and for your party?
I'll refer back to what I said previously without repeating myself. But the other thing is, and this is distinct to our party, is that it's my contention that COVID did not cause the economic problems we had to a large extent, but the way the provincial government and the federal government handled it, right? So instead of a targeted approach where we protected the most vulnerable and allowed everybody else, gave them the information and allowed them to assess the risk themselves and decide what level of risk they were comfortable with, if they wanted to continue working or not, if they wanted to continue their own business. We adopted a blanket approach that nearly ground the entire economy to a halt. So why would a small why should a small business owner vote for me? Because I am against provincial lockdowns. We don't want to have those again. Now, we get into the weeds a little bit in terms of what's a provincial responsibility and what's a federal responsibility, right? They're instituted by the province, but the federal government plays a role in influencing them. And so small business owners should want an advocate in Ottawa who will say lockdowns are not effective at what they say they do. We need a targeted approach to protect the vulnerable and allow businesses to keep running, right? Restaurants that have had to go down to 20% capacity and then 10 and then 50 and then, right? Or guys that do roofing or painting or whatever else. We need to allow all of these business owners to assess their own risk rather than saying, you may not work. We're going to allow huge retailers to continue running, but your small business, we don't consider it essential, so we're not going to allow it to run. I repudiate entirely the distinction between essential and non-essential work. Whatever work you do to provide for yourself and your family is essential by definition. So we shouldn't have any hand in defining that. So again, why should small business owners vote for me? Because every other party, if it comes to it, will be in favor of lockdowns again.
Thank you. And you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, you can't avoid talking about that. And a huge issue that people in our community are talking about is the vaccine passport, so-called. What is your party's opinion on that?
So we're the only party that is entirely against vaccine passports and mandatory vaccines. We've been, I think, and I've personally been very clear that I'm not anti-vaccine, our party is not anti-vaccine. We are pro-informed consent and privacy. I refused, there was a story in the newspaper 2 weeks ago because I refused to answer whether I was vaccinated or not. I said it more politely for the sake of going in print, right? But essentially, whether you've been vaccinated or not is entirely your business and not mine. It's not my business. If you're an oversharer and you'd like to tell me, sure, I won't be rude if you want to tell me. But it's not my business. It's not my concern to ask you. And we've never considered health information like that. We've never considered ourselves entitled to other people's health information ever before, right? So obviously the NDP, Green Party, Liberal Party are entirely for vaccine passports. They would contend that a vaccine passport is not the same thing as making vaccines mandatory. And that's true in a semantic sense, right? They're not going to come door to door with a syringe, right? That's true, of course. But when it becomes a prerequisite for gainful employment in the public sector, in the private sector, for having a job, for participating in society, that's effectively the same thing as making it mandatory, right? So it's semantics to call it that it's not mandatory. The Conservative Party of Canada, right, Aaron O'Toole, the leader, initially said, say 2 weeks ago, said their party, if in power, would not institute a federal vaccine passport system, but he would support, or they would support provinces that choose to do so. We're at odds there already. A PPC government would advocate against that, and insofar as doing so, the provinces might be violating the Canadian Constitution and Charter, we would challenge it. And then the Conservative Party of Canada has gone even further, right? About a week after that, Aaron O'Toole said, never mind, it turns out people like vaccine passports and I'm getting criticized too much, so we'll have a federal one too. And so this is probably, on many issues, your listeners would probably be able to pick up on, our party is quite a bit different than the others, and none more so than this.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question that a lot of our viewers were very concerned about, or they all wanted an answer on, is how will you and your party address the housing crisis that is here in Peterborough?
That's a great question. It's a cliche, right? But owning a home is part of the Canadian dream, right? It makes you blush a little bit to say it even because it's so cliche, right? But that's, we all have the idea that we go to school, if we apply ourselves, graduate, get a good job, own a home, have a family, right? That's just the way it's supposed to work. Obviously, that's not the case. You're going to hear, and your listeners are going to hear, if they haven't already, that every party has a plan to manipulate the housing market, move things around in one way or another. And all it boils down to, the plans the other parties, so if I say the Liberal Party and Conservative Party, for example, they want to infuse or flood the housing market with more money. So whether that's giving grants to first-time home buyers or mandating lower interest rates or subsidizing this or subsidizing that. All that does nothing to the price of housing, right? The price is based on a supply and demand reality of economics. If they just flood the market with more cash through, now you can borrow against your RSP or you can have a grant for this or for that, it just drives prices up. It's possible that if they institute their new subsidy plan on September 1st and you're the first person to buy a house September 2nd before the market is caught up, maybe you benefit. But in general, it just drives, right? There's more money, so the prices go up. The only thing that makes sense to talk about when it comes to housing prices, right, and the price of buying a house or renting is tied to the cost of buying a house, there's really only three factors, right? There's supply, there's demand, and there's buying power. So in terms of demand, demand for housing is high. Our party would reduce immigration quotas from where it is now at about 450,000 immigrants per year to down between 100 and 150,000 per year. So that's going to naturally reduce the demand. We would also work with the provinces. I should say the following, in full credit, is not unique to us. Every party has some kind of a plan to work with the provinces on foreign buyer speculation and that kind of thing. So we're not going to take credit for that entirely. Every party has a plan for that. So reducing demand through lower immigration levels, working with the provinces on foreign speculation and the money laundering that happens by some foreign buyers in the high end of the market. And then there's supply and there's buying power. So housing supply, you will hear again and again, our MP, the current federal government saying, we will build I don't remember the exact number, so it's so forgive me for that. We will build 150,000 new homes in Peterborough, or we will build. It's not the role of the federal government to build houses. I don't want federal government employees swinging hammers, new developments. They need to get out of the way. Home builders, we have home builders, right? There's lots of them in Peterborough. Some of them continued working during the pandemic and some couldn't. We have home builders. That's not the problem. It's not a labor shortage. The issue is a long-term one, and it's actually more of a municipal issue, right? So if you want to, right, if you bring in a home builder and interview him and just ask him, if you buy a piece of land and you want to build a house and sell it, how long does it take you to do that? So not pouring the foundation, putting up the drywall. How long does it take to get approval from the municipality, or do they have to work with the province? How many regulations, right? How long and how expensive is that process? Governments only make that more difficult, only make it take longer. So that's at the municipal level. So municipalities have to allow for quicker and easier home building, right? It's the rule of supply and demand. So a federal government could advocate, could try and influence municipalities to remove restrictions to allow more home building, but it's not something a federal government can mandate. So there's demand, there's supply, and there's buying power. So is the $100 you make today still worth $100 in the market 6 months from now when you're looking for a house? When inflation, so right now the Bank of Canada inflation target is set at 2%, it's higher than that and it's increasing, so your $100 is not going to be worth, whether it's in the housing market or groceries or anything else, it's not going to be worth $100 6 months from now. So our PPC government would set the Bank of Canada inflation target to 0% to cool down that sector, and it would have an impact on others as well.
Thank you. So Paul, we have spoken to a few other candidates before you, and just watching debates and hearing the news, climate change is kind of at the forefront of a lot of parties' stances. So what is the PPC's party's stance on climate change?
So it's an important issue to a lot of people, and there's no doubt that the climate has always been changing. That's a fact. As part of our platform, we want to make sure to protect clean air, clean water, clean soil, including on reserves. That's an important thing. The question is, for people whom climate change is a really important thing, and fighting global climate change is an important thing, there's a couple of questions to consider, right? What proportion of global carbon emissions, even if we grant for the sake of argument that individual human activity contributes to carbon output, which therefore warms the planet, if we grant that for the sake of argument, what proportion does Canada contribute to that? There was a climate science guy on my Twitter account a few days ago tag me and say, actually Canada's contribution is huge to global carbon output, global climate change. It's 1.5%. I'm not sure why anybody would think that's huge. That's obviously a very small fraction in terms of, and that's somebody who's very concerned about climate change and is maybe taking the high end of the possible range, right? So Canada, we can commit ourselves to all kinds of targets, right? The Paris Climate Accord, lowering emissions, this and that, and it doesn't matter in terms of a worldwide global phenomenon, it doesn't matter at all if China and India do not play by the same rules. If they're not going to hit their targets, if they're not concerned about it, whatever we do will have almost no effect. So the question is, knowing the impact that going away from fossil fuels, which by the way, for those who like to disparage the use of fossil fuels, affordable energy has done more than almost anything else to bring people out of poverty globally, right? Affordable energy is a great thing that is alleviating suffering around the globe, and so we shouldn't demonize it in our country. The question is, how badly do we want to wreck our economy for a potential 0.5, 1% impact? Even if, again, granted for the sake of the argument, even if somebody's answer to that question was a lot, we should still, Canada has a moral responsibility to set a good example that 1.5% is not nothing. The good news is a PPC government would want to remove restrictions so that individuals, right, so that the Canadian, the scientific mind, the entrepreneurial spirit can have opportunities to develop new green businesses. Whatever if that's something you're passionate about, develop a product, make a program, get investors, take it to market. We should have 10,000 little projects like that. The government, it's going to sound like an overstatement, but the government has almost never done anything better than an individual who's really passionate about something can, right? If you really care about climate change, tell me 5 things the federal government does really well that you really love. And now I'm going to say you're going to have trouble coming up with that list of 5 things. And now you want to put the thing that you care most about, most passionate about, you want to give it over to that organization that does almost nothing else well. we would say, good news, we want to allow people to pursue their passions, including fighting climate change, helping the environment.
Thank you. So, Paul, that just about wraps it up for today, but I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
And it is, why should Peterborough and the Kawarthas vote for Paul Lawton, PPC?
I would say that the direct answer to this question is, excuse me, if you listen to what I said and compare it, maybe I shouldn't admit this to you, I didn't watch the interviews with the other candidates.
That's okay.
I'm guessing on this. If you listen to what they've said, if you read their platforms and compare it to ours, ours is the only party who are willing to say there are things that you might care about and might be good in and of themselves, but the federal government is not the best organization to do that for you. It's a hard thing to say. It's a hard thing to say, but we're the ones willing to say the federal government should do a handful of things and do them really well, and should stay out of your life otherwise. We shouldn't have to wake up every day wondering, what did the federal government do today? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? What's happening? We want the government to manage what the Constitution says they should and stay out of everything else. And that's going to benefit businesses, that's going to benefit homeowners, that's going to benefit teachers and students, that's going to benefit everybody in terms of freedom.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you coming out here today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.